In my last video, I broke out this bad boy, which is my Ibanez RGIF7. And if you're a fan of the channel, you may remember some videos I made a while back about some Ormsby Hype GTR guitars. What do all of these guitars have in common? This is a bit of a niche video and we're gonna get nerdy, but you should absolutely stick with it even if you're not interested in extended range guitars. Because we're also going to talk about stuff like tension and string gauges, which you may find useful, especially if you've ever felt like your choice of strings isn't working for you. A guitar's scale length is the distance between the nut and the saddle. And on this guitar, like on the Ormsby's, that distance increases gradually from the highest string to the lowest string. On this guitar, the highest string is 25.5 inches long, which is the same scale length as a Fender Stratocaster. The low string is 27 inches, which is getting into baritone territory. It's an overall increase of 1.5 inches, or just under 4 centimeters. That's what's known as multiscale. And because of it, the frets are arranged in this progressive pattern, which is why these guitars are also referred to as fan fret, because as you can see, the frets are fanned out. So it's an interesting look, no doubt, but what problem does it solve? This is a conventional guitar with a standard scale length of 24.75 inches, which is also known as Gibson scale. It's also tuned to E standard, which is E, A, D, G, B, E. But let's imagine for a second that I want to tune that low E string down to B. Okay, so it's now in B. Immediately, the issue is that the string is now very slack. This is going to cause me several problems, but to keep it simple, it's going to be very difficult to play and it's going to sound bad. It needs to be under more tension. I could tighten it back up using the machine head, but this would increase its pitch, and I want it to be tuned to B. There are two other ways to increase the tension on this string. The first is to increase the gauge, which means to put a thicker string on there. The second is to increase the length of the string. For that, we need a different guitar. This is a baritone guitar, which has a scale length of 27.75 inches, which is a full 3 inches longer than the conventional guitar. Not only that, but where the lowest string on the conventional guitar was 56 thousandths of an inch thick, this one is 80 thousandths of an inch, which is almost 50% thicker. We've used the combination of a longer scale and a thicker string to increase the tension, because just one of those solutions on its own wouldn't be practical. You'd end up either with a neck that's too long or a string that's too thick. But using both together, we now have good tension while tuned to B, which keeps the guitar playable. For a lot of people, this is already a fine solution. Just make the guitar longer, put some bigger strings on, and you're good to go. There's plenty of very cool baritone guitars on the market, and they're all a lot of fun, including this one, which is also very affordable. Let me know if you want to see a full review of it. But the issue you're going to run into is where, as we've seen, it's a bit of a challenge to make these lower strings tighter. It doesn't actually take all that much to increase the tension on the higher strings. As a consequence, with the increase in scale length and string gauge, these top strings here start to feel a little bit too tight. It's fine if you're playing chords and arpeggios, but if you're playing solos, you want to be able to get up there and bend these little strings around with all the flexibility that you're used to. And that extra tension is going to make you have to work a little bit harder than you necessarily want to. Add to that the slightly larger distance between frets, and it's less than ideal. It's still workable, but look. One of the coolest things about guitar technology is that over the past 70 years, and even within my lifetime, we've gone from having to make do with whatever's available to being able to fine-tune guitar designs to meet everyone's specific needs. These guitars didn't exist when I started playing guitar, and I'm well aware that there's going to be a lot of people who look at these and scratch their heads, but they're specialist instruments, they're not supposed to be for everyone. Realistically, very few guitarists are out there searching for guitars that give you baritone tuning with perfect tension while keeping the top strings nice and slinky. But for those who are, here's the solution. I was one of the guitar players looking for this solution, and I love these guitars, but I'm going to try and stay objective. Because life isn't fair, there are definitely downsides to guitars like this. One issue you're going to run into is that there aren't a lot of these guitars around, although they are available at most price points. The problem there is that you'll struggle to find one in a store, and you're definitely going to want to try one out before you buy it. I bought my first one, the Ormsby Hype GTR7, without ever having played a fan fret at all. And it cost me almost 3 times more than this one, which I actually prefer, so word to the wise on that one. The second issue is that all of the multiscale guitars on the market all have this kind of futuristic prog metal aesthetic, which to be fair is kind of informed by the extreme dimensions and the asymmetrical design. That's fine for me because I like this kind of look, but if you're more into classic or retro designs, you're going to find your options seriously, if not completely, limited. A third issue is that if you like to tinker with your guitars, you're going to struggle to find parts. The problem is that a lot of this guitar is on an angle, from the bridge to the pickups to the nut. So these EMGs, for instance, are normal pickups, if you can call an 8-string pickup normal. They've just been installed on a slant. But on the Ormsby, for example, the pickups themselves have an inbuilt slant, so you can't just grab any pickup off the shelf if you want to upgrade. Not only that, but not all multiscale guitars use the same angles. So it's unlikely we'll ever see the usual third-party manufacturers turning out a standard series of aftermarket parts for you to choose from. At least not in the same quantity and variety they do for standard scale instruments. Now perhaps the biggest issue you're going to run into is what strings to use. This might seem like a controversial statement, but for me at least, none of the standard 7-string sets on the market go anything like heavy enough. The heaviest Ernie Ball 7-string set goes down to a 62, which is still nowhere near the tension I need, and I'm only tuned down to drop A, which is like the 7-string version of drop D. Now, I must like heavier strings than most, because string manufacturers clearly know what they're doing, and they're not just making string sets that nobody wants. But I've had to settle on the Ernie Ball 6-string baritone set, adding an 11 for the high E. I'll put the string tunings and their corresponding gauges on the screen now. So as you can see, I'm using a 72 for the low A, which is very heavy by anyone's standard. As I said, this may not be as heavy as you or anyone else wants to go, and that's fine, it's not a competition. The gauges I use aren't the ideal gauges, they're just my preference. But the takeaway is, you'll probably need to try out a bunch of different gauges before you find the one that's right for you. If you haven't played one of these, you might be wondering when I'm going to talk about the learning curve. So listen, I'm not going to say it definitely won't be a problem, but I'm what you might reasonably call a middling guitarist. And my adjustment time to fan frets after playing flat scale guitars for almost 30 years was next to 0. If you were going from a standard scale 6-string guitar to this guitar, by far the biggest adjustment would be the extra string. A distant second would be the scale length on the lower strings, because there's a bit more of a stretch for stuff like suspended power chords. I would say the third adjustment might be the angle of your right hand on the bridge if, for example, you do a lot of palm muting, because you kind of have to angle it inwards a little bit. But the thing most people tell me they would be worried about is the likelihood of fretting the wrong notes, because the frets aren't parallel and they're used to parallel frets. I'm not going to go too deep into the science of ergonomics, but as a general rule, when something is redesigned in such a way that makes it more comfortable to use, you don't actually have to unlearn the adjustments you made to accommodate the discomfort. We've had centuries of parallel guitar frets, despite the fact that as you go up the neck, the angle of your wrist changes, unless you kind of move your elbow around in this weird way. But once you have frets that match your wrist angle as you go up the neck, you'll stop doing that weird elbow thing almost subconsciously, because your body never wanted to do it in the first place. Are fan frets easier to play? Now, we all know things are never that simple. I can say they're nothing like as difficult to play as people think they look. And they give you the additional tuning and comfort options I've described, which you absolutely won't get from a conventional guitar. What I am certain of is that if you're ever in the same room as one, you should give it a try. You may of course hate it, in which case you'll have at least learned something about your own preferences. Or you might be surprised by how much you like it, in which case you'll have broadened your horizons in terms of what kinds of guitars you want to try next. Either way, if you were curious about these guitars, then I hope I've been able to clarify some things for you. I like them so much that I have two. And they're my main guitars for both live and studio work, so that should at least reassure you that you don't need to be a virtuoso to play them. If you have any questions that I haven't answered in this video, I'd be more than happy to answer them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.